Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Thanks for coming and being on the show with us at No Instructions today. We've got Earl Foote of Nexus IT. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his story. You know, the purpose of this podcast, for those that you know are new, is going through and learning about like how businesses got started and the process that it took. You know, a lot of times we talk about really big businesses and we glamorize them, but we don't really talk about like how it went from idea to invoice. You know,
we don't talk about the real stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So tell us Twitter style, just what is Nexus IT?
Yeah.
And we'll kind of go from there.
Nexus IT is a hyper-responsive, worry-free approach to IT and cybersecurity services. So the business leaders can focus on growing their business and forget about the technology that drives it.
Yeah, give us an idea, anything that might help us, and we'll get to more of the details later.
Thanks for the invite, by the way, Chad.
Yeah, of course.
I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you took the time. We always interview really busy people, so we're grateful that you took the time. Tell us about, the scope and size of your business today. Like, where are you at sort of in this like business journey?
Yeah, sure. You and I were chatting about this, but, started the business, and I don't want to go back to the origin story yet because I know we're going to get there, but started the business 25 years ago. It's been an interesting journey over those 25 years, plenty of roller coaster moments and, lots of up and downs and some pivots along the way and, rethinking the business and innovating and all that kind of stuff, So today, we're an 8-figure business,
right.
And we employ full-time, or on a part-time fractional basis in the neighborhood of 75 people.
Wow.
We're from our perspective and by industry standards in the U.S., ultimately we are what is called a managed service and managed security service provider, right? We consistently out of about, depending on the way you look at managed service and managed security service providers, call them those that are hyper-focused on, you're familiar with the SaaS world, right?
Right.
Where the play is all MRR and ARR, right?
Right.
In the managed services, tech-enabled services, we're an MRR model as well. And in that model, if you look at industry-wide, nationwide, there's about 30,000 of us. If you look at the greater market of IT service providers, about 120,000. And
outside the U.S.?
No, here in the U.S.
Here in the U.S.
Okay. 30,000, or 120, depending on how you look at it. We typically land in the top 500 in performance, and oftentimes in the top 150 fastest growing, out of those 30,000. So we feel like we've figured out how to innovate, how to thrive, how to build and grow a tech-enabled services business, which is typically a pretty boring, slow growth, not sexy, kind of business. Most of about 90% of those 30,000 are sub $2 million in revenue a year and below, right?
I'm sure.
So you'd call us a mid-market MSP, we're about 5% of the market. And then, that higher end of the market, the megas, which include the Capgeminis and Cognizants and Accentures and even Microsoft and Dell and IBM who have their managed service practices.
Who also do managed services.
They're enterprise.
Like Accenture.
I've
even heard some of the accounting, the big 4 accounting firms
EY,
also do manage.
They all
do it.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, everybody tries to get into it. Yep.
Which is really validating to what you do, right?
It's a hell of a model, and it's only projected to continue to grow really well.
And it cash flows, or it should.
That's why over the last 5 or 6 years, there's now about 125 PE-owned MSP platforms, nationwide, because it's slow and steady, but it cash flows, right?
Yeah.
It's not a massive cash burning business like
like some of ours on the tech corridor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, we sort of messed that whole thing up. But let's go back and let's start where your story starts. Does it start in school or does it start when you were younger?
Yeah, it starts when I was young.
Okay.
I guess I've always had a lot of drive, a lot of ambition.
Were you good in school?
Yeah, I was good.
Okay.
I've always been, honestly, I'm probably ADHD. I've never been diagnosed.
All of us are.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can be an entrepreneur if you're not, some extent of ADD or ADHD. But like being good in school was required of us back then. I mean, I'm a generation older than you are, Chad. You'd take the whippings if you weren't doing good in school. So I was always a 3.5 and above student. In college, I was a 4.0 student. I was on Dean's List. I got my school paid for.
And where'd you grow up?
West Valley City, Utah.
In Utah.
Yeah. But my grandpa was an entrepreneur. My mom's dad. He always had something up his sleeve, something new he was cooking up, and mostly in the RV space.
Really?
Yeah, if you're familiar
Travel
with
trailers.
that. Yeah, if you remember that, or the big motorsports land lot on State Street in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
That was my grandpa's lot way back in the day. And it's passed through hands and stuff. But
what did your parents do for a living?
my dad started he was a career guy, very sharp, an incredibly hard worker, very risk averse. And so he started as an apprentice electrician at Wasatch Electric, and he retired as today what we'd call the COO, or he was the president of operations of Wasatch Electric. So over a 45-year career, worked his way from an apprentice to second in command of Wasatch Electric. At the time, about a $70 million a year company when he retired and stepped away.
Definitely a career path there for him. So how did you fit in with that, right? Like you're sitting here watching your parents and your dad, who's pretty risk averse, and finding himself with maybe some golden handcuffs at some point, right? Like making good money. Like at what point
he didn't make good money until we were all grown, actually.
Really?
Yeah. Like, he didn't really hit those upper ranks until we were all out of the house. But my dad was always a really great leader and a really great people person, right? And I grew up seeing that. Like, people gravitated towards my dad like nobody's business. It was kind of crazy. Everywhere he went, it was like people would flock to my dad. He's just super likable. Just his demeanor and his energy, was good.
Is he still around?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, they're up there. They're getting close to their mid 80s, and beautiful people. My parents. My mom, mostly was a stay-at-home mom, but she did little things. Had little odd jobs. Had her ceramics studio at the in the basement of the house and stuff like that to help make ends meet. We grew up poor, Chad. 6 kids. I was the youngest of 6 kids. On an electrician's salary. There wasn't a lot to go around. It was tight. It was I remember you basically had 2 pairs of shoes for a year. You got new tennis shoes when school started, and if your toes were sticking out of them by the end of the school year, you're kind of tough.
So be it.
Yeah, so be it. And you got new church shoes at Easter, right? That's kind of the way it worked. And we weren't they weren't Nikes. We were going to Payless,
Yeah, totally. I also went to Payless. I'm one of 11.
Okay.
And grew up in Southern California, and so I, and my dad earned, an income, but we used it for sure.
Yeah.
So okay, when you say you had a lot of drive when you were younger, what does that mean? Like what makes you think that you had a lot of drive back then? Did it come out in school with your friends, or did you try some business or something?
I didn't really try business. I did some student body kind of things, I thought I'd go into politics at one point, and then I kind of realized what politics was. And, I was like, no, I don't think I want to do that. But no, I always wanted to do something meaningful, like I always just felt like I was driven by some purpose to do something, whether that was just rallying the guys around the neighborhood to go, cook up some crazy, thing for the day, right? Or, and of course I did the standard things, the lemonade stands and the, the paper routes.
All the kid
and
stuff.
All that kind of stuff that are kind of your first exposures. I mean, I did start working at working, my first job, 12 years old. I would walk a mile to the local grocery store, and I would clean, this was during the summer. Yeah. It was like, I think it was the summer after sixth grade. I'd go clean the butcher's department, every day.
That's brutal.
It was terrible,
That's
man.
Brutal.
It was the worst job. So like 4 hours of, wiping down the butcher department and cleaning it at 12 years old, right? But that was, I wanted to work and I wanted to make money. I wanted to have my own, like literally from the time I was 15, I never really asked my parents for another dime. Like I bought my own clothes, bought my car, bought my bikes, paid for my dates, right? Like, just did my thing. I was independent.
You figured it out.
Yeah.
So what'd you do after high school?
So I went to school for a year.
Okay.
And then I did a traditional kind of Utah thing, LDS mission, and then
where'd you go?
Back. Originally I was supposed to go to Ecuador.
Really?
Yeah. There were some problems there was a conflict with Peru going on at that time. I was sent to Boston to wait for a visa, and a month in, they changed my call, so I stayed in Boston.
Wow.
And I worked with the Hispanic community and did Spanish and Portuguese speaking in Boston.
Did you, do you still speak Spanish from that?
Hablo español.
Yeah. Que bueno.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Enough that I've married 2 Latinas. So.
There you go. There you go. Good for you. That's awesome.
Not simultaneously. Let me get that out there.
One at a time.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. So when you got back, what year would this have been roughly?
96.
Okay, in 96.
Yeah.
What happens at this point? Where do you go?
Yeah. Let me think about this. I finished up a 2-year degree, and then
where
at Slick.
Okay.
So I transferred during high school, actually, I dual matriculated. So I did my senior year, I did half day at high school, and then I would drive over to the Redwood Road Salt Lake Community College campus, and I would do half day of college. And at that time, I was studying architecture. So I was doing architectural courses and stuff. Anyway, so I did 2-year degree, transferred to the U, got married by 23. Let me think. Let me go back. 21. I got married by 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was 22 and change.
Young, definitely.
Yeah. A typical Utah thing, right?
Yeah. Not that weird in this part of the world.
Yeah. Especially, 25 years ago, right?
Right.
So got married at 22, at 23, had my first kid. I was working full time during the day, now in civil engineering to make ends meet. I was going to school full time at night. Married, had a kid, and started a business.
So that's what we want to get into. So you just combed over a bunch of important stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to school for architecture, and this somehow leads you into getting a job in civil engineering, right?
Yep.
Did you enjoy it?
No, and that's probably why I'm where I'm at now.
Okay, so but then hold on. Before you jump into that, like, how do you go from civil engineering to IT infrastructure and management?
Yeah.
So that's what we need to learn about.
Let's back up even one more step to architecture, okay?
Okay.
So I grew up very artistic.
Okay.
I have and I know...
You're a musician, too.
I'm a musician. That's my art form today, right?
Were you always a musician?
Yeah, I grew up from like the age of 6 playing piano, right?
Okay.
Piano, and then I convinced my parents to let me play drums, and then I went to college, and my college buddies and I decided to form a band, so I taught myself guitar and bass, and now I play bass, right? That's my primary instrument at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's just like it resonates with my soul.
If you ever want to like enjoy watching a band, watch the drummer and watch the bassist.
Yeah,
They're running a show.
Dude, we're
like,
the
best.
groove. Like, you don't know, but you dance to us.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You get enamored with that lead singer and the charisma, you know, and all that kind of stuff, and the lead guitarist, you know, shredding.
Yeah.
But the reality is like what moves your feet is the rhythm section. It's the bassist and the guitar or the drummer. You know,
exactly.
Yeah, and we're always in the groove, sitting in the pocket, like hanging out and having a good time. And
that's so awesome.
It just resonates with my soul. Like, you know, I don't know. It's just like that's where you feel the music.
You can. Like it. I have a cousin who we actually found a note on his phone after he passed away. He actually passed away in a motorcycle accident.
I'm sorry.
And he wrote this whole like journal entry on his phone. He was actually homeless for a while.
Oh. Okay.
And he talked about, you know, how music like healed him, and how it like he said, music will move your soul, and if it's good enough, it'll make you move your body.
There you go.
You know, like anyway, it's kind of cool.
No, that's very poetic. So yeah, growing up, I was always creative, artistic. I thought I'd become an artist. My parents convinced me that was not a career that would take you anywhere, you know, and pay for a family, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I'll become an architect because that's, you know, I'm a professional artist that's, you know, making money, right? So that was my path. You know, after I'd come back from Boston, I was looking for a job. And back in the day, like you looked for a job in the classifieds in the newspaper, in the black and white section, you know, of the newspaper.
There was no Google.
There was no www, man. Like literally, breaking the chair. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
There was no Google. Like there was no even Monster, you know, no Indeed, nothing like that. So there was this ad for this company, you know, looking for an apprentice, and they were advertising as an architectural firm. So I bugged them enough that they finally hired me, basically. You know, like I'd check in with them. Mike and Dan, they were brothers running this company called M&M Brothers. Mitchell, that was the last name. So Mitchell and Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
I bugged them enough, you know, over the course of a few weeks, they finally hired me as their apprentice, and I get started, and, you know, it turns out really they're a civil engineering structural detailing firm. And I made a decision which may have been a foolish one, but, you know, I was working, and again, 25 years ago, the way you chose career paths was different. And I'd come from a very conservative, you know, kind of viewpoint on, you know, on career paths, right? You know, my dad being a career guy, one company, this whole, you know, 45-year career.
So you had to have been influenced by that a little bit, right? Or some expectation that that's what success looks like.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And then there was my mom's dad, who was, you know, the entrepreneurial side. But my parents were always, you know, they were very kind of vocal about how risky that was, right? And you know, how they weren't very, they didn't really approve of that, right? And I think, you know, my mom's family, they went through some challenging times, as most entrepreneurs' families do, you know, like there's some feast and there's some famine, right?
Yeah.
And of course they just different generation, like literally their parents went through the Great Depression, and they, you know, they came through times of scarcity. And so it was like, you just be a career guy. Like, you know, that's the path. Like you need stability, you have a family, you got to take care of that family. So that was kind of their, you know. And
starting a business back then was a lot harder.
Dude, it was,
way harder. I mean, you could spin up a business and a bank account a day now, you know, back then it was like manual effort, you know?
It was, and there was the ecosystem didn't exist to enable, like today, like I'm super envious of budding entrepreneurs today, because like just the amount of this alone, the thought leadership out there, you know, available to help. None of that existed when I started.
Right.
So I didn't finish telling you. Landed the job with the structural engineering firm. I changed my degree to structural engineering. And I did that while I put myself through school for 4 or 5 years, while I was, you know, starting the business and stuff, and ultimately kind of just decided that it wasn't my jam. It was a little boring sitting behind the same desk.
Well, I'd imagine, right? You're a musician. You're kind of probably a little bit of a free spirit.
I am.
But you're like, I got to take care of my wife, you know. You have a kid
kids,
now,
you know,
coming soon.
Yeah.
So at what point did you get this idea for Nexus? At what point were you thinking somebody has got a problem that needs to be solved?
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So, this was the day and age of multi-levels in Utah, right? And so,
yes,
my brother and I had already dabbled in a few little
And for
businesses,
those that don't
right?
know, this is multi-level marketing in Utah way back when, in its heyday.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's network marketing, right?
Yeah,
Multi-level marketing is illegal.
Yeah. We'll just call it something else.
And we're in the Mecca right here, in Utah County. Yeah, we're in the thick of it. I'd already kind of dabbled in a few of those little things, got some exposure to
like a little side money or something, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So my brother came to me, and he's a few years older than me. He came to me, he's like, "Hey, look, I found this thing," and this was right in the middle of the .com boom, right? 1998. Yep. Microsoft and Apple taking off, Google starting to be a thing. And he's like, "I found this thing," and he had recently graduated as a systems admin, so he'd gone through an IS degree, right?
Right.
And he's like, there's this company called NetSales that has API into, at the time, well, they still are the two biggest distributors in the U.S., Tech Data and Ingram Micro. For $500, you get a turnkey website and you have millions of SKUs of computer hardware and networking gear, right? And he's like, let's do it. If you build it, they will come. 1998, digital marketing didn't even exist. Like, we had no idea how to drive traffic to a website.
Or what was traffic.
Or analytics to measure the traffic.
Right.
And we definitely didn't have the budget to try to drive traffic to the website. So anyways, we launched this website. We're sitting around for a month or so, like kind of twiddling the thumbs and going, what's going on? Yeah, we had a few orders, rolling in, but we thought, like, we're going to be Bill Gates, in a few months here, like, millions of dollars of, orders just flowing in. Right. The funny thing was that actually led really quickly though to a number of businesses starting to ask us to help them manage their technology. And
because you were getting exposed to it at the time. Yeah. Right. So they're like, "Hey, Earl's a tech guy. Can you help me with this tech thing over here?"
Really, my brother was a tech guy and I was the civil engineer, right? Mm-hmm. But I was making a pivot because I didn't love civil engineering. So I was making a pivot. I just took all my brother's, all of his books, and I went and studied and then took certifications and stuff to, because I wasn't going to go back to school for, I was just kind of finishing up school.
And just for some people that may not know, I mean, programming, and security, existed long before, this sort of internet age. People were coding in the 60s.
60s, yeah, sure.
So, but it looked very different. Everything back then was on-prem, right? Everything was hardwired.
Yeah,
at
no
the time.
Cloud existed. No, totally. I mean,
it was intense. You had to literally have an IT guy on premise.
You did. Well, and that was just it. Small, medium-sized businesses, couldn't afford to have an IT guy in order to make sense. You didn't have enough work to keep them busy, so you would contract the IT guy. And that's where quickly we had this aha, kind of the first entrepreneurial epiphany of there's a need here, and there's a need that we can solve better than a lot of people can solve, right? These small, medium-sized businesses, some of them, in the first 5 to 8 years of actually using technology, or literally, we were helping businesses effect their original digital transformation. We were taking businesses off of paper, man, in the late 90s and, putting them in client-server environments on-prem, and so we kind of, this business category for us of contract IT services became a thing, but it was more like, okay, we're going to either lease ourselves or talent to you, on a fractional basis for a certain amount of hours per week or month. And
would you write them up for a steady amount of, hours? Yeah. Or would it be kind of like an as needed basis?
We had a few as needed clients, but from the get-go, it was more like a monthly contract amount of, and it was block hours. So it was like, okay, you want an engineer on site for 4 hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 hours a week. Our rate's X, so a month that's going to be X, and we'll just send you an invoice every month for it. Right. And so
at what point so your brother comes to you this idea, and you're like, oh, okay, that maybe sounds a little crazy, but kind of sexy.
Yeah. So
like
we
this
put
could be cool.
$250 into that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Each. Yeah.
It's $250 each.
As a fledgling college student with, a wife and a kid at this point, trying to scrap up $250 in the late 90s.
Can I retroactively invest?
Yeah.
$250.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So like, what was the conversation with your wife at the time? Was it like, hey, I want to quit my job? And at what point did you quit your job?
No, yeah. So I have to remember the timelines here. It was probably 18 months in.
Yeah.
That I had a falling out with an employer, and we decided to part ways with each other.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and I started kind of applying for some other engineering jobs.
Yeah.
But I had enough contract engineering work that I was making ends meet. So I was like, I can also, but I was only working maybe 25 hours a week on that.
Yeah.
But at contract rates back then, I was probably charging $35 an hour or something like that.
So you didn't quit your job yet.
No.
So you got the business started with kind of moonlighting, right?
Yep.
And I think this is important for people to know too, because like for those that haven't done it or first time founders, they think there's this like cold turkey moment where you just like go home and tell your spouse you're quitting your job, and then the next day you come up with an idea. It doesn't work that way. Like the best thing to do is to sort of overlap and moonlight until you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. See, and honestly, I think that's I think there's a misconception of entrepreneurship that particularly younger generations, it's been romanticized. And a lot of that comes from Silicon Valley, and the way that, venture-backed tech has been built and, the media. Yeah. And for me, it's like, honestly, I still recommend people, founders to be scrappy, to bootstrap as long as they can. Like, do not quit your day job until you can replace that. Especially if if you're single, you're living with 8 buddies in a little apartment and your nut's pretty small, that's a different story, right? If you're married, have a kid or kids, you got to be able to replace that nut, so you got to hustle nights and weekends, right?
Yeah.
That's the way that I started, and once there was enough revenue there to pay for myself, I went full time, and then we brought my brother on full time, maybe 9 or 12 months later.
Were you guys thinking about like organizational structure and, who did what role back then? Or was it just kind of like, we have business, we got to fill it?
Yeah.
Like how did that work? Because, today you're the CEO, right?
Yeah.
So, with you and your brother, how did that look back then?
We were just co-owners, and it was like we were, and this idea of like a founding team, that hadn't really come to Utah yet, maybe that was all budding and, in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, but we were just business owners. We were co-owners in the business, and it was whatever it takes. Like, you do accounting, you do sales, and accounting at night, is when you do all your accounting and billing and invoicing and payroll and all that kind of stuff, right? And you do sales and you do marketing and you do you do customer service. And my brother and I in the early days, we were doing technical services and we were managing projects and the whole thing, right?
So you'd bill out your own time too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like
that was the only way to
job.
make it work. That was the only way to make it work. I'm not, and that's the other thing is like, tech-enabled services, the margins are significantly different than what they are in like SaaS, right?
Yeah.
Like 40 or 50% in difference, in bottom line. So, you got to be super scrappy when you're doing services.
Yeah, definitely. So, you're starting to get customers. You guys both go full time, and because this is a real business, you're cash flowing, right? So you're actually able to pay yourself.
Had to.
So there was no thought about investors, right?
No, well, and
wasn't even a thing.
And the thing is, like, in tech-enabled services, venture capital does not invest in tech-enabled services.
Right.
It doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
If you have some proprietary software that can be commercialized and that you can, have a go-to-market strategy for, even though you're tech-enabled services, then you're a candidate for venture capital. Otherwise, investment just doesn't flow into services really, that's more of a PE play, but you got to be a lot bigger, right?
Right.
So
then what was the next step? Like, you guys are starting to get these customers, like, where did you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, we just thought we were going to build a dynasty, and I think we learned that this industry, it's kind of slow, and, we learned a lot of lessons about building relationships and long sales cycles, and then how to hack those sales cycles.
Would you say the sales cycle is kind of long for Nexus?
Yeah, I mean, early days, like, it could easily be a 24 to 36 month sales cycle because like
that is long.
The way I express it is, business leaders don't outsource their technology and their cybersecurity to you until they know and trust you implicitly, and so generally speaking, like back in the day, that was going to like BNI groups or, chamber groups and, getting to know, business owners and business leaders and building relationships. And, when the opportunity arises of whoever's taking care of their IT right now, it's not going to work out anymore for whatever reason.
Then you come in.
Then you come in, right?
Yeah.
And so long sales cycles, and that, that's still partially, the reality. Of course, our go-to-market strategies are far more sophisticated at this point. We've figured out how to hack those cycles.
And your ability to service the customer is different today, right? Given the cloud, like back then, if you were billable, were you on-premise?
On-prem, man.
Yeah, that's so different than today, right?
Here's the crazy thing. Like, if we were doing remote, we would have U.S. Robotics 56K modems we would dial up to that were connected to a server, right? And so you were trying to do server maintenance or, in the middle of the night or dude, we were working around the clock.
What was the original, man, this is making me sound even a little dated looking back at this, but like we used to remote my very first startup. This was in 2012 or so. We used to remote desktop into our on-premise server.
RDP.
That's what it was. Man. Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
And it was crazy. And then I remember we used to have this Microsoft Access server in our office.
Yep.
And then I would have to remote into it when I was traveling.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Terminal server. Yeah. That actually still exists, right?
Yeah.
It's not.
Do some still do it? Do you have customers?
Some still do, Yeah. I mean, it depends on particularly organizations that are on like legacy softwares where you kind of still have to go terminal services and RDP, but you gotta go a really secure route for it. But of course, VDIs and things have changed. Cloud technologies have changed all that. So yeah, that was about 2004, 2005. We made a big investment into one of the first what's called remote monitoring and management platforms called Kaseya. A $500,000 investment, right? That thing cost us over a 5-year lease, 5-year, financed.
Wow. I mean, you're only a few years old as a business at the time, right? That was a big purchase.
We were like 7 years in, couldn't afford it, but it changed the way we did business to where we could automate a lot of what we were doing. We could do a lot of it via remote. We've always been a relationship-based company, so we still do a lot of FaceTime at our clients' locations.
Yeah.
Especially COVID, that propelled everybody being more used to doing remote services and stuff. So today, 80-85% of what we do is remote, and then the rest is on site.
So I'm curious about how, fast forwarding a lot, going to COVID, did COVID help you or hurt you?
COVID was for MSPs that were well poised, well positioned. It was a force multiplier.
Wow.
Because suddenly all of your clients and a whole bunch of people that were not your clients had to figure out how to take their whole teams remote, and they needed technologists to architect, design, deploy that, secure it, for them.
Yeah.
And
more than anything, securely, right?
Yeah.
You could have all sorts of stuff.
I can tell you that wasn't number one priority. Number one priority was just connectivity, right? Number one priority was like, we need operations to function or we're going to go out of business, right?
Yeah.
But that was, of course, we were preaching like we need to do this in the most secure.
That was a really weird time for me because I had sold my business a few months before the pandemic started.
Oh yeah.
And I was kind of just with my family, and then the world stopped, and it was like I was doing some consulting for some friends and stuff, but like I wasn't doing anything like really full time, and the world just shifted while I was out of it. And then when I came back into it, starting another company, it was the weirdest feeling because everyone was used to working remote now.
Yeah.
And I wasn't, anyways, it was a weird time for sure.
Yeah. So I could see how, being out of that seat for a little bit would make it awkward, make it kind of challenging.
Yeah, it was hard for sure. I feel like I'm more used to it now. Our team's mostly remote, but so I want to go back to these early few years of you starting Nexus. Was it called Nexus at the time?
It was called PC Nirvana.
Okay.
So
Nirvana play on the band?
No, everybody thought that.
You don't want to claim that.
It was Nirvana, the heavenly state, right?
Yeah.
The euphoric state, right? So it was like, if you want your technology to work, not be a thorn in your side, we're going to give you Nirvana on the technology side, right? But we rebranded 2004. We sold the retail side of the business because we had a retail and business to business side of the business at that point. Yeah. We sold the retail side of the business to existing employees, and then pivoted, to business and rebranded to Nexus at that time. Yeah.
Very great. Yeah. And with these early first few years, was there light at the end of the tunnel that this would be amazing? I mean, you mentioned building an empire, right? But it certainly probably wasn't that easy getting business early on.
No, it was slow. It was tough, and honestly, I mean, neither my brother or I, had studied business. We didn't really, we had no business being in business, we didn't know the first thing about how to run and operate a business. We didn't know about business finances. We didn't know how to sell and market a business. We didn't know any of that. Right. So you have to teach yourself that. I mean, like any founder does, even if you've been through, you've got an MBA and, you still have to go learn real world application of all that. Right. Yeah. Yeah, man, it was a long road. Some very meager times. I mean, I think my initial salary I was taking out of the business was about $20,000 a year, $25,000 a year in 90. This was probably, by the time I went full time, it was probably 99.
Yeah, even then it was still low.
It was low, man. It was, I mean, it was.
So what kind of pressure did that put on your family over the next few years, right? Because I think some people don't understand also, even when you do start selling and bring it in, sales just mean you need to spend more money to keep up with the customers. So just because you have more sales doesn't mean your problems get a little better.
No,
but how was that on your family?
Misconception with growth in business. Like people think that, they see you hiring a whole bunch of people and like your business really growing, and they think that, you're cash flowing millions or tens of millions of dollars. It's like, no.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite. Growth is so expensive.
For sure.
You might even take a pay cut for a while,
In fact, I had a friend call me today and he's like, how are you doing? And I'm the type, if you ask me how I'm doing, I'll tell you, not just passively, I'm fine. Yeah. Like you ask me how I'm doing, I'm like, I'm feeling a little stressed. And he's like, why? And I said, well, my business is growing. And he's like, that's great. And I was like, yeah, you don't know. This is when it's the worst.
Be careful what you wish for, Yeah, when you're in high growth mode, it's, man.
So
it's a wildy beast.
How was that on your family back then?
Rough. Yeah. I mean, it's still at this point, well, at least into the early 2000s, I was still working full time. Well, let's see. So I probably stopped working full time 99, maybe 2000. But I was still in school, business, and
you were busy.
I was never home, even the weekends, because I was trying to build a business, So it was tough. I missed a lot of the formative years of my kids, years, which, that's one of my great regrets. I mean, when they got to be a little older, I was able to, spend a lot more time with them and, be the soccer dad and, that kind of stuff. They're all adults now too. And we spend a lot of time together now, but, and we're super good friends, but those early years, I'd leave home, at 6 a.m. and get home at 11 or 12 at night, and I wouldn't see them,
Do you think do you think that maybe they appreciate that now, or do you think there's any resentment still?
Both.
Okay.
I think both. Yeah. They understand, they know the sacrifice, and I think there's respect for the work ethic. And it's as they're transitioning into adulthood, it's beginning to rub off on them as well. Like my boys can work.
It's in there. It's in their DNA.
It's in their DNA. Yeah. It was in mine too. My dad. I've never seen anybody work harder than my dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Any of them work in IT or anything in technical or?
So interesting enough, well, my youngest was going to go into computer design and development. Game design development, I should say. Now he's actually in school and working full time as a welder. In school to get a welding degree, which he loves, and he's artistic. He's a bass player too.
Oh, cool.
So like the ornamental iron kind of thing,
do you know
it's
like
perfect for him.
One of my favorite things to do the last couple of years is weld.
Oh,
it's
really?
like relaxes me. So
that's what he loves.
I race cars, and I work on them and I like make them and fix them and everything.
Yeah.
And this weekend I'm actually looking forward to because I'm doing a welding project in my shop. So
there you go.
Freaking love it.
You and Zephan can geek out because that's
totally.
That's what his jam is right now.
He's welcome to come and practice in my shop whenever he wants.
Awesome. I'll let him know. But my oldest two kind of have dabbled in several different things, school and different career paths and that kind of stuff. My 22-year-old, my middle son Isaac, right now he's in boot camp at Camp Pendleton with an intelligence and cyber contract.
Really?
So he's kind of following the footsteps, but with a much more interesting side with that intelligence side
with a clearance.
Yeah.
Is it something where he's programming or is he going to be working in security?
No, security. Yeah. This will be. He'll be. And it depends on kind of he'll go through schooling with the Marines,
right.
And then have a military career.
Yeah.
And then he has an option of, turning out and going civilian.
Very cool.
Or, stay in a military career. But, I'm not exactly sure what that career path is going to lead to, whether it's, a cyber analyst, kind of position, or the intelligence side, of course, is quite a bit different. But that still has significant implications in, in private markets today,
but you definitely. But like, definitely you had some influence on how they see work should go.
Yeah. And I encourage them to explore other career paths.
Yeah.
What I do is you're on 24/7, 365. Like, when you manage IT and cybersecurity for several thousand businesses, like there's you don't get to turn anything off, right?
Yeah.
Hackers notoriously work in the middle of the night or on the weekends, so that's when you're most vigilant.
Yeah.
So I actually encourage them to explore other career paths. My oldest right now is enrolling in a cyber boot camp, and he's pretty gung ho on that. Like he's kind of explored all of his career options. So they've made those decisions on their own. Again, I was kind of like, you should probably go find something different to do. Even just go be a programmer. Go be a developer. But now that's not a good career path right now with venture-backed tech kind of.
It's kind of slowing down, but it's still like the demand is still really
of course,
strong.
That's what you do. You lease that talent. So
well, yeah, but like it's kind of interesting. We were really interested to see what was going to happen during the last year, and what we found is that like most of the companies doing layoffs were laying people off in G&A, general administrative roles and sales marketing roles.
Yeah.
But a little bit less on the product and development roles because significantly less, right?
You got to survive.
Your customers have to be taken care of, right? And you have to have those.
You have to continue innovating and developing the product.
Exactly.
Your customers will go
and
away.
Most of these funded and VC-backed companies are spending 30 to 50% on sales and marketing.
Yeah.
So of everything,
right.
And they're losing a ton of money, right? So it's actually a great time if you're looking for salespeople.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of them got laid off.
Yeah.
So what's the next step for you with your business? You guys have grown like crazy. You're a known brand in this region, and a lot of companies, tech and non-tech, would use you. Like, what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, very good. And I appreciate that. We've come a long ways. It's been a lot of work to get there. Certainly hitting our stride over the last 5 to 8 years. This year alone, hitting the 33rd fastest growing company in Utah on the Fast 50 list, the 81st on the Mountain West Capital Network list. Those are pretty big, accomplishments for us. It's a lot, like you mentioned. Growth is challenging. The next step is really building a regional powerhouse, and that's, in services, we look at things quite a bit, well, especially services where you have to have some on-site capabilities and presence. We look at things very different than a SaaS, company looks at it, right? Because we need physical presence in marketplaces, and we need to...
At least temporarily, right? Well, because you guys also go help with like on-premise infrastructure, right?
Yeah, of course. You still have to.
You'll run Cat 6 lines or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, structured cabling isn't our biggest gig, but you'd be surprised how many companies still build on-prem networks. Really? At minimum, you got to have, if you've got 80 people in the office, you got to have infrastructure and connectivity for those people to do their work.
That's true.
You may not have servers, but a company that size, most of them still have some servers on site.
Yeah.
There's kind of this movement of people moving back off the cloud right now too, and going
trusting
back
it a little bit less.
Yeah. And there is, depending on the cash cycle of the business, cloud can get really expensive. On a resourced consumption based model, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's not that we're trying to drive it. Like we're all in on cloud. We do a massive amount of our own private cloud as well as Azure and AWS and all that kind of. We manage about 55,000 Microsoft licenses.
Wow.
In Azure and M365 licensing.
Just Microsoft.
Yeah,
that's not even including AWS.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and granted, we're more a Microsoft shop than anything else, right?
Ironically, I happen to have a Microsoft Surface with me because I use this to tune my cars.
Yeah.
But because everything's on a PC, but I almost always am on a Mac. But I do have, I do sometimes use Microsoft.
My primary machine's a Surface.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I like them. They're good.
Yeah. So to answer your question, really we're on a journey to, establish a regional powerhouse. We have clients nationwide. And we have some physical presence in other markets, but we want to become a significant physical presence, in the Intermountain West.
Yeah.
And then use that momentum to begin our national expansion on a greater level. So that's really where we're at. That's partially through organic growth. It's partially through acquisition, M&A activity.
Okay. What do you think? What would you attribute as one or two? You could be two if you want. One or two of the most significant, the most significant things that helped you get to this point as a leader, as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there's quite a few things, but one for me is realizing that you are the bottleneck. You as the founder or founding team, or the senior leaders in the organization, you're the bottleneck.
Yeah.
And if you don't figure out how to develop and grow at a really quick pace, grow your mindset, grow your acumen, your capabilities, your knowledge, your ability to lead, to execute, if you don't develop at a significant pace, you're just going to handcuff the business, right? Mm-hmm. So investing in yourself and being a constant learner, being really curious, getting really good at being real about the mistakes you make and owning those mistakes and then learning from them, holding mini retrospectives with yourself or with your team or, full retrospectives and be like, okay, we messed up.
Yeah.
What are we going to learn from this? How are we going to prevent this from happening next time? Right.
Right.
So there's that. There's also building out a network of people who can really who lean into you. Advisors. Maybe it's a formalized advisory board or a formalized board. People who really identify with you and who are willing to part with a lot of their knowledge and skills and capabilities to help you grow.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to pay for that, right?
It's not cheap.
But I've had a lot of angels that have come in my path as well, and those are primarily OGs, that have been there, done it. Like some of them, who have been, they were in wave one of Utah Tech, right?
Yeah.
and they built really significant businesses that were sold to HP or Intel, you know, and stuff like this. So, and they're people who are willing to part with some of their time, you know, either on a pro bono basis as an advisor or, you know, they give you a pretty good deal, right? So those have been game changers, you know. I think, you know,
it's helpful.
Yeah, really helpful.
What about, you know, I keep thinking and, you know, looking back, you know, and starting the business with your brother. Is your brother still around in the company?
No, in 2012, we divided the business in half.
Really? Assets
and clients, and we went our separate ways.
Wow.
We were always building kind of two separate businesses. Which was fine. We didn't have the sophistication to know like what we were.
It wasn't going to last forever.
Yeah, I wanted a growth business, and he really just wanted a lifestyle, something simple, you know, more simple to manage. So, you know, he manages his IT business, and I manage mine.
That's awesome. Does he still have his business?
Yeah. Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's helpful when you look at it that way. We've talked about that quite a few times in here, you know, with other guests about lifestyle and a growth business. And it's cool to hear that, you know, from the get-go, that was the goal, to build a growth business.
Yeah, it was for me. Yeah. I think he just wanted simple, you know, and I get that, man. Like a growth business takes a toll. It's difficult.
It's not for everybody.
It's not.
In fact, it's for few.
Yeah. I mean, there are times where I ask myself if, you know, I mean, again, be careful what you wish for, right?
It comes with a lot of problems.
Man,
that's for sure.
It's a lot of work. It's just never ending.
Yeah. It's like get $1 and then invest it. You know, get $1 and then invest it.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, you should be really proud of what you've accomplished, you know, this far, and it'll be interesting to see what you're able to do in another decade or so. But I mean, you have been in this thing, you know, for most millennials, this, you know, today and even more like the Gen Z, like, you know, this is, you're committed in building something awesome. So
yeah, and plenty of ups and downs and pivots along the way. I mean, you know, part of that pivot was when my brother and I split the business. I divested almost all of we had a lot of e-commerce brands still at that point, and I divested most of those, stripped the business back to IT services, you know, to $500,000 of revenue that first year in 2012, and then have rebuilt, you know, into the 8 figures over the past, you know, 11 years now, you know, rebuilt the business, right? And it's been a grind of 11 years, but, you know, here we are.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So we'll keep at it, and we're really excited to see what you do next. So thanks for coming on the show.
Chad, man, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for hanging out with me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.
Thank you for joining the podcast. This particular podcast was recorded at Rookery Studios in Orem and Salt Lake City, Utah. If you want to start your own podcast and need a studio, a hands-off, done-for-you studio from beginning to end, check us out. Go to our Instagram, Rookery Studios, or our website, therookerystudios.com, for more information on how you can get your entire podcast done for you at a very reasonable price.